Well, hi there, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Well, the end of the financial year presents a number of opportunities, and we explore those throughout many of our Feeling Smarter episodes. But today we're going to dive into related investments within SMSF. So, end of year comes about, distributions to be paid, dividends, and the like from these related entities. So, that in itself invokes a lot of interest from the ATO, and specifically, we've seen rulings over the time, SMSFR 2009-3, about the timing of that reporting and the fact that if we have those entitlements that need to be received, we need to be getting the timing of that right. So I'm going to get you to just sort of paint the picture a little bit about how this works practically and what some of those red flags are for the ATO as regulator.
Yeah, so look, forgive me if I oversimplify this to start with, but I'm sure by the end of it, I won't. I will totally overcomplicate it. But if we start out in a real simple sense and talk about managed funds, right? So lots of self-managed super funds invest in managed funds, and we know that self-managed super funds, from an accounting point of view, largely operate and you almost say exclusively, but largely operate on a cash basis. So from an accounting point of view, money comes in, we account for it in that financial year that it's received. The only time we don't do that is with trust distributions, right? And so when we take our standard managed funds that many self-managed super funds invest in, we bring into account the distributions they receive, and often they receive those distributions in July or
August. Yep.
Yeah, and the odd occasion September, but it's pretty tight sort of from a time frame point of view. You then get your tax statements that are prepared by those managed funds and you account for it accordingly. When we deal with related trusts, the concept is exactly the same, right? Yep. So the related trust will prepare its financial statements, and the related trust will determine what its distributions are going to be, and they will then report those distributions, and then they will subsequently pay those distributions to the self-managed superannuation fund. The kicker is that usually those related trusts are not preparing their financial statements until much later into the new year, and often it's one of the last entities that is prepared. So we're often seeing these trust reports being prepared in the second half of the financial year following the year in which the distribution is due for. So we sort of see this real timing delay, or this lapse in time before any distributions are paid, and that can often extend into the next financial year as well from a timing point of view. And so really what the ATO are alluding to, and what we're trying to identify here is, how long is too long with reference to the payment of that distribution, and what is the expectation on the trust and the SMSF from a reporting point of view.
Yeah, so one of the things here, so I guess timing in terms of when the work gets done can create an issue, but equally we're looking here at profit versus cash flow, because there is an obligation in essence to make a taxable distribution from that trust, and that's the nature of what a trust ultimately is here, is to distribute those funds. But the entity in essence needs to have the cash to be able to make that distribution at that point in time. So what are some of the other areas here that trustees and the advisors around this need to be aware of? Because this is an area of quite significance from an audit point of view. When we look at these at year end, like the blowtorch goes on this area as much as any when it comes to the SMSF segment.
Yeah, look, and that's a really key point. The blowtorch does go on, but the bright lights don't. We don't. It's not something that that gets talked about with great admiration, like the contribution rules and the pension rules. We don't sort of put a positive enough focus from an education piece on a lot of these related party transactions, and these are rules that ultimately haven't changed ever. The rules have been sort of firmed up, and the ATO have done rulings on a lot of these areas for SMSF specifically. And so those rulings give us some guidance with regards to how to treat these situations. And the classic situation that I think funds often find themselves in is the worst thing they can do is just wait and expect everybody to be okay with the timing of the distribution. And so I think there's the concept of, if we know the distribution is going to be delayed or whatever, if there's a reason, then there has to be a justifiable reason for that. Otherwise, should there be something brought into account from the SMSF point of view, because the SMSF is entitled to that income.
Yep.
So either we give them that entitlement and we have the unpaid present entitlement requirement from a reporting point of view, or we increase the capital of the fund by potentially either creating a new investment, if it's possible, and understanding the rules around reinvestments, or are we actually creating a liability from that unit trust to the super fund beyond the present entitlement that needs to be represented in a way other than as a UPE, so as potentially as a loan from the trust to the super fund, and then we're starting to jump into significant in-house asset considerations.
Yeah, that's really where I was starting to my thoughts were starting to go to kind of ask the next question, because this is where we then have other investment restrictions that will then start to come in play that we need to be conscious of. And again, I go back to the blowtorch issue that I was talking about before, is where very quickly the fact that these aren't being dealt with in a timely basis can create a number of compliance issues within the fund, beyond the fact of that it just should have been paid in the first instance, because this is something historically that these things have been kind of just blowing up over time. And really, again, it's coming back to getting this documented right and making sure that we're very critically complying with what the requirements are under the SIS laws.
Yeah, and I think there's then, to take that one step further, is that many of these trusts, as you'll appreciate, Aaron, fit under the concept of a 1322C unit trust, and part of the narrative there is that to keep the effective in-house asset exclusion that sits around 1322C is to ensure that a 1322D event does not occur. And one of the key 1322D events is that the trust must be dealing on an arm's length basis, right? And so from arm's length is on commercial terms. So is it commercially acceptable to not be paying that distribution, right? And does that non-payment of distribution tarnish the very nature of the trust itself, which then has a whole heap of other things, which we'll say for another Feeling Smarter one day, as to the consequences of not transacting on an arm's length basis.
Yeah, and I mean that could lead all the way through to sole purpose ultimately. Yeah, why did the fund go into this investment in the first instance if ultimately it's not getting the return that it would have ordinarily decided to have got in taking that decision in the first instance?
Yeah, that's right. And so for me, just sort of the couple of key practical things is, one, is make sure that you get these payments made as soon as it's practically possible to, and certainly keep the fund in the loop with regards to it. But also from a unit trust point of view, ensure that you report things appropriately. So you're reporting things as a unpaid present entitlement or as an entitlement distribution amount for the unit trust or for the super fund. Don't use words like loan in the unit trust financials or anything like that, because that is a red rag to a bull from an auditor point of view.
Yeah, and ultimately we're dictated by what our deed talks about as well. So that deed that governs that investment or that constitution, because equally we're talking about stuff that could be in a related company here as well. We just need to make sure that we're complying specifically with the requirements of the deed there too. So Tim, as always, wealth of knowledge. Thank you once again.
Always a pleasure.
And we look forward to you joining us for next week's edition of Feeling Smarter. Have a great rest of the week. Bye for now.
See you all.